Well, thank you, Mr. Nitin Jaiswal, Head of Government and Regulatory Affairs and Strategic Relations at Bloomberg LP Asia Pacific, the moderator for that session. And thank you to all the esteemed panelists for their fruitful and a very engaging and substantive discussion on leadership in action, nurturing sustainable organizations in a developing economy context. Thank you very much. Well, it's 3 o'clock over here in Malaysia. Time to turn the spotlight on right now. And the spotlight will shine on Datuk Muhammad Umar Swift, Chief Executive Officer of Bursa, Malaysia. The time to act is now. That's the title of this fireside chat the first fireside chat in this summit. And the moderator for this fireside chat, well, he shaped responsible business policy and regulation for more than a decade, focusing on sustainable development, human rights, climate, and nature. He currently leads global policy engagement and external affairs at CDP, boosting policy ambition and accelerating action on climate and environment. Now, prior to CDP, he worked at GRI, fostering corporate sustainability and transparency in national policies, as well as major regional and global intergovernmental processes, such as the Rio 20 conference and the adoption of the EU directives on disclosure of non-financial information. He is the proud architect of the business engagement in the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. He co-authored the SDG Compass and shaped and lead the UN Global Compact and GRI's business reporting on SDGs action platform. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to pass the floor over to the moderator for the Fireside Chat 1 Spotlight. The time to act is now. Please welcome Global Director, Policy Engagement and External Affairs, CDP, Mr. Pietro Bertazzi. Over to you, Mr. Pietro Bertazzi.
Ciao, Pietro.
Buongiorno. Thank you, Mr. Rahim, for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning from Amsterdam. My name is Pietro Bertazzi indeed. I work with the CDP, a global environmental impact, not for profit, working to secure a thriving economy that works for people and planet. It's a great honor for me to be here today, and I would like to thank the Global Compact Network Malaysia for the kind invite to join the Go ESG ASEAN 2021. It's a true pleasure to be with you, despite virtually, and join the ESG community. I remember right after the SDG Summit in September 2015 took place in New York and the SDGs were adopted, I traveled from New York to Kuala Lumpur to present the SDG Compass, a guide for engagement and action on the SDGs. And fantastic progress has been made in the past few years. I remember particularly during that mission, I did visit Bursa, Malaysia, since the exchange was finalizing the requirement for listed companies to issue a sustainability statement, narrative disclosure around the management of material, economic, environmental, social risks, opportunities. They looked actually at the double materiality, at the risk, opportunities, value creation, as well as impact on people and planet. And indeed, progress since then has been fantastic, still possibly not enough. The UN, as the Secretary General, declared the one that we're living until 2030, the decade of action, and the time to act is now. So welcome again to the Spotlight session with a fireside chat with Mr. Datuk Muhammad Umar Swift, the CEO of Bursa Malaysia. Umar, thank you so much for being with us today.
It is my pleasure, and thank you for the invitation, the team at UNGC. And it should be the other way around. After your introduction, perhaps I should be moderating your chat.
Absolutely. The spotlight is on you. Today, the spotlight is on you. We're really eager to understand better, the role that Bursa Malaysia played and is still, playing as a steward for many listed companies in the country. So we think that at the moment, companies in Malaysia as well as worldwide are at various different stages in progress towards effective environmental stewardship as embedded in the SDGs. And we are particularly looking at SDG 13. Many refer to climate change as one of the preconditions for sustainable development. As many other forward-looking organizations, Bursa Malaysia is charting its own net zero future. And we'll talk a lot about, how Bursa Malaysia can use its regulatory and market operator function to support national efforts and help public listed companies improving their sustainability practices. Can you tell us, about how Bursa is leading by example in this rapidly evolving space?
Thanks, Pietro. And again, thank you for having me here this afternoon, albeit briefly. There are probably two elements when you look at, as you quite rightly said, Pietro, the stewardship function. Bursa itself is a listed company and seeks to lead by example. But as a frontline regulator, we also set the rules of engagement to some extent. So we have two lenses that we would apply. In the first instance, when we look at Bursa 1818, which is what I call the company, this year we have adopted a move towards, I'm pleased to say we will be carbon neutral by 2022. And we've also adopted net zero by 2050. Now, of course, our aspiration would to be bringing that 2050. Now, to give it context, I mean, you have clearly the call to action with the Sustainable Development Goals, and we've already got our roadmap to sustainability, and more importantly, we have engaged and we're making, or we have subscribed to CDP, and we're becoming very much more transparent. Now, I think the lens I would then take is we have our actions, which is to quantify our use, move on our science-based targets and the steps we're taking. But I'd also take a step back and look at the greater market. On the exchange, there is 940 PLCs in broad terms, of which we encourage them to, of which only 76 admitted to the FTSE for Good Sustainability Index. Now, I'm not going to debate the merits of MSCI versus FTSE or the different methodologies, but they have adopted an international standard. But I only have 76 companies at this point in time. Now, I have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do to actually bring everyone along. And I think the key thing as we have this fireside chat is to get the debate going around sustainability is an imperative, is not a cost, it is an investment in the future. To remain relevant, we need to make sustainable profits. Profits are not bad. Profits create jobs, they pay tax, but it needs to be sustainable profits. And I think that's the key. And so there's this pivot to green that I'm sure we will explore as we go forward. And so at the exchange, we want to lead by example and say, look at what we're doing. We've taken a problem, we're breaking it down into parts. Now, to be fair, my biggest challenge, of course, is the electricity we use. We're not a high polluter, but of course, we're reliant on a grid. That is one of our biggest challenges as a nation. If you look at the recently released WWF report on Malaysia, we need to address transport and power, and particularly emission from coal, as we pivot to carbon neutrality in 2050. And I think that is the whole conversation in Malaysia, that as we go on this journey, there will be, unfortunately, perception of winners and losers, where actually there are only winners, because global warming doesn't pick and choose. It's going to impact all of us. Wild weather, climates that are unsustainable, and unfortunately, we will just not be able to continue to live the way we live unless we actually make that pivot to green.
Thank you, Mark.
Go on a bit longer, but
yeah, no, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think it's particularly interesting to see the double role that Bursa plays, and I think it's particularly important, the points that you were raising around making the business sustainable. It's about, the long term, the profitability needs to be combined with the input and the companies have. And my next question is precisely around that. Bursa Malaysia is one of the growing numbers of actors that has been approaching the double materiality, which lens that offers a reading of materiality, looking at both the input of the environment on the company, as well as the input that the company has on sustainable development on the environment. The approach is used by us as CDP, as well as other international standards, such as GRI, as well as, many regulators. And increasingly, there are a lot of regulators that are approaching that lens. The European Union has been leading the way, as well as Switzerland, the UK, among others. Can I ask you to elaborate a bit more why Bursa Malaysia has chosen to adopt this approach, and how do you think that disclosure done by issuer can input and has had an input and has benefited the Malaysia capital markets?
I think our approach is fairly straightforward. You need to look at how the risk to you as a business, and then how you impact the environment you're in. It's a two-way street. It's a holistic approach, because that is what the sustainable solution is really the crux of sustainable solution. We are not robbing from the future. We are living in the now, creating value. And so when we look at, and I think it also resonates with the values of society as we understand it, Pietro. I mean, we respond, and we are a part of society. We need to then look at how we cannot be an opportunistic organization. And by applying by applying this double materiality approach, you're actually encouraging appropriate corporate behavior. Now, as you take that forward, I think it's necessary. What we have at the exchange, and we of course, when you visited us, we took the double materiality lens. We then formed disclosure around sustainability. What we've seen is very good compliance with reporting, but the quality of reporting has been less than what we wanted. And as we move forward into 2021, and I'm not really talking out of turn, we will actually be engaging the public and saying, well, we will be calling for public feedback on. We're looking to implement sectorial reporting on a mandatory basis around these material issues, so that investors and customers and other stakeholders can take a view of listed issuers and understand where they stand and what they're doing, applying this double materiality lens. So I think that there's a theme around disclosure, and there's also be a theme around assurance and provenance, which I think is fundamental. And this is a growing discussion. Pietro, as you know, Malaysia has made the statement around carbon neutrality 2050. The Prime Minister has made this statement. It's the first time the statement has been made, and we welcome it. More importantly, we at the Exchange have been entrusted to establish a voluntary carbon market, which again gets back to assurance, provenance. In our mind, would this carbon market be a emissions trading scheme? I mean, I know in Europe, most countries started carbon tax emissions trading scheme, then now there is an emergence of voluntary carbon market. Time is an imperative in the Malaysian context. Passing legislation takes time. And the decisions has been made, or the policy decision has been made, to start with a voluntary carbon market, rules-based, which we can affect, and commence that discussion of building an ecosystem, which then dovetails into a maturity of an ETS, or a domestic emissions trading scheme. And we're starting that journey, and we're actually very excited by it. So you're going to have this theme of disclosure, moving to mandatory disclosure so we can have informed decisions, the theme of assurance. So you claim you have a carbon, this is your position. Can you validate it? So there'll be an assurance piece. So you have disclosure, assurance, and then ultimately, as we move into the carbon market, we'll have provenance.
Yeah.
Where is your carbon credit coming from? Is it valid?
Yeah, thank you, Umar. And there are questions coming in from the audience. Indeed, you point out how disclosure and assurance are important. But do you think is this enough for the data users, the ultimate users of the information disclosed by the companies, to trust that information? What do you think is the key ingredient for trust in disclosure used by the different stakeholders?
Trust is earned, and to earn trust, it has to be third-party validated. Now, of course, the feedback we receive, and I'm sure you've received the same feedback, validation, assurance costs money.
Yeah.
And so as we build this ecosystem, one of the initiatives we're taking at the exchange is to build up a competency framework, which we actually partnered with UNGC in Malaysia. So we'll have a competency framework to build the capacity and capability. You then build, if you like, when something becomes common, pricing forms. So at the moment, if you like, the validation of carbon credits and offsets is seen as a little bit esoteric. It is not mainstream. We now need to bring all this to mainstream, building that capacity and lower the cost. But more importantly, we know IFSRB has been given responsibility for the convergence of the various standards, but in a Malaysian context, we're not seeking to rebuild standards. We're looking for best fit. We're looking for commonality. We have this conversation going on around taxonomy from a banking perspective, because banks and green funding are fundamental, and also a taxonomy for the securities market being driven by the Securities Commission in Malaysia. We have to talk the same language, measure the same thing, and then have agreed standards for providing that assurance. And assurance, too often we will see, and I'm taking nothing away from those that report, but there needs to be confidence in what is reported. So it needs to be validated. And if you like, quite often you'll see lovely histograms, pie charts, but the data is very hard to find. And that gets back to that theme of mandatory sectorial disclosure, which would be in a format that is easy to read. So users of financial statements will be able to see what's been disclosed, where does it sit on the continuum of good behavior. Let's not talk about bad behavior, let's say good behavior. And then what is the assurance around that you're providing me on that data set? And then I can make an informed decision as an investor, as a consumer. Is this a company whose values resonate with me?
Yeah. No, thank you, Umar. And it resonates particularly with us as CDP, that the access to the information is particularly important. The structured information is important so that the users can actually meaningful read, understand this data. And this is, something that it's very close to our heart as CDP, because we offer our platform to really structure the data around the different questions to ensure comparability. I wanted to go back to the reference that you made to the net zero announcement by the Prime Minister Ismail in Malaysia. There are, those ambitious commitments require transition pathways, right? And companies, of course, are essential or critical in that pathway. Earlier last month, actually, just before COP26, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is an initiative joined by UN Global Compact, WRI, WWF, and CDP, has issued a net zero standard for various investor groups have committed to maintaining their net zero portfolios as well. So based on that, can you talk a bit more around your vision for Bursa Malaysia role in national decarbonization efforts?
I think there's probably, I get back to the 76 constituent members of the index, mm-hmm. who have, not Of course, we like FTSE for good because we have a relationship with them. So there's a bit of caveat emptor there. But that being said, I think it's a stepping stone, and it's the right stepping stone. I think the key then becomes is inculcating in the bedrock of these companies sustainability, particularly, the impact on environment. Now, I think we of course focus on environment, social and governance. We're talking about a broader context today. We're just focusing on one in particular, which is not a problem. And I think the key thing then becomes the cost of social cost as well as the financial cost of that pivot to green. Now, I think as a young country, as a young nation that is aspiring to become a high-income economy for its people living in Malaysia, I think there's a specific challenge. Energy is the ultimate lifestyle product. Yeah. Without energy, we would not be talking today. We could be talking, but it would take us a long time to get together, and we would not have the wider audience that we're reaching.
Yeah,
it is the ultimate air conditioning, heating, our computers. So it is so energy is the ultimate lifestyle product. It is also a product that creates productivity, and we consume it with gay abandon. I'm often fascinated by the billboards that are LED screens. And in a Malaysian context, which is quite warm, there'll be air conditioning provided for the LED screens. It's a fairly large use of carbon to advertise. And so we need to start thinking about how we live our lives. We're consuming this energy. We are generating value per se. But what is that double materiality lens has to be applied. Then the next piece we then look at is how do we fund that pivot to green? Sustainability is seen, and so why do I have only 76 companies out of 940 that are embracing wholeheartedly sustainability on that journey? And it's perceived as a cost.
Yeah.
In the Malaysian context, companies' constitutional memorandum articles of association, up in the first few paragraphs it's a bit like a partnership. Common body formed with a view to profit. Now, I'm inserting the term sustainable profit.
Yeah.
Not just profit, because profit could be short term. We now have to educate that if we are going to have businesses that have true value, it needs to be sustainable. That's a conversation of education. Then for the economy, we need to also expand that conversation so people do not see green as threatening. There will be people, there will roles that will cease in high polluting industries, carbon power, motor vehicles. There needs to be a pivot. If you're combustion engines. That being said, there's green hydrogen. There's a whole new host of different technology that Malaysia can harness and become a part of to actually aspire and achieve its goal of becoming a high-income economy. Then it becomes a question of access to capital to fund it, which gets back to the conversation regarding taxonomy within the banking sector and support of green funding.
Yeah. And Umar, I'm mindful of the time, and there are still questions coming from the audience. But I wanted to ask your thoughts, to hear your thoughts around the topic that you glimpsed on, and I think it's coming back, in this last part of the conversation, which is relative to the change of culture, to the role of the business in society, but even in society at large. It's critically important that in this transition we put equality and justice in the middle, at the core of it. This leads to the important question about how and about the role of the behavior and society, social change that can play in creating the enabling conditions for this transition. Can you share your perspective on how we can reconcile and address environmental social issues in a more holistic way?
So, sorry, Pietro, I just was looking at my chat group questions coming through. Just reframe that question for me.
Yeah. I'm really eager to understand, how you see that we can reconcile the need to address environmental and social issues in a more holistic way. What is the role that justice and equality plays in the transition towards net zero, low carbon economy?
No, thank you for that clarification, Pietro. I think the key thing is fundamental. It is about equality. It is about values, and it's not just on a national level. It is on an international level, if I may be so bold, that we need to be looking at that pivot to green. And can high-income economies help growing economies? Yes, they can. Access to capital. And they can be a part of the success story of that journey to green, if I may be so bold. And I think it is needful for that. We need to move from coal to gas. Now, of course, as a country, we move to natural gas. Is how much CO2 is in my gas? Then do I have to do carbon sequestration of the gas, of the CO2 that is in my natural gas as I aspire? And so there's a whole host of support, as well as this needs to be funded. So it is about, no one can be left behind when we start this journey to sustainability, because it's fundamental.
Yeah.
Environment, social, governance. So if we don't drive equality and we do not bring everyone with us with the same opportunities, there will be no buy-in. You cannot impose sustainability on a nation. The voters, the members of society need to embrace it and say, this is something we want. And I believe they are. And we just need to demystify it and make sure it is not threatening. And I don't think it is. And that conversation has to take place. So it's not us and them, it is just us, if I may.
Absolutely, and leave no one behind is one of the motto under the SDGs. So it is indeed, part of the agenda. And I think, Bursa is playing an amazing role in bringing the companies on board, but even beyond that, I believe. I'm mindful that we have 2 minutes left, and I would like to leave with a question that is coming from the audience. But I think it's a nice sign for the market in Malaysia for your listed companies. And the question is relative to how Bursa can actually help newly formed sustainability department in a company. So how can you go from those 76 companies that you mentioned to the 940? What can Bursa do to help that transition?
We're here to help. and I mean, I'm not being flippant. We really are here to help. if I may, for those, and that's the question that caught my eye just before, please do look at Bursa Sustain. It is a wealth of information. We seek to break down the problem to its component parts. Please do work with UNGC. We have just launched a new sustainability practitioners competency framework with microsite. I mean, this is not so much a plug, but it is a resource that Bursa we've invested in with UNGC support to actually make a difference. On top of that, so you have Bursa Sustain. Our disclosures that are coming are designed to encourage appropriate behaviour, as I watch the clock counting down. But more importantly, do reach out to Bursa itself and the sustainability department, because we have courses we're running. We are here to support and provide some guidance. Now, for companies that we do have the resource that we're on today. Also look at the CEO Action Network, which is an informal group of CEOs. I'm a member of the steering committee, of course, funnily enough, hence the plug. But it is designed to support and encourage and provide guidance and, a common language where we actually bring the issues of today and provide a lens around ESG so we can look at how to adopt. I think all of us on boards have a role to play. We need to be advocates, and we need to encourage our fellow board members to adopt behaviour that is sustainable.
Many thanks, Umar, for shining a light on how Bursa is advancing this agenda as an operator in the market, as well as playing the stewardship role. It looks like there are a lot of ammunitions there, and there is an infrastructure to help the companies. Therefore, I think we have a good call to action to the participants today. Thank you once again for your time, for your insights. It's been a true pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, thank you, Pietro. Thank you, team UNGC.
Have a good day.
Have a good one.